The putrid stench of retribution hung heavy in the pre-dawn air, an acrid symphony of decay that marked a precise act of calculated vengeance. A seismic rupture had torn through the Worthingtons' meticulously manicured lawn, unleashing a torrential geyser of raw, liquid waste. It erupted skyward, a monstrous fount of filth spraying across the once pristine landscape, reminiscent of some vile, subterranean beast breaking free from the earth's clutches. Nolan Maxwell remained utterly still, a silhouette of grim resolve etched against the nascent light, his gaze fixed on the unfolding spectacle through the grime-streaked windshield of his sturdy pickup. His features, usually expressive, were now chiseled into an emotionless mask of stone, reflecting not horror, but grim satisfaction. This calamitous event, this emergency call that had drawn him out into the desolate early hours, was no accident. It was an intricate, deliberate trap. Days prior, with chilling foresight and meticulous execution, he had personally initiated the blockage, meticulously orchestrating the very catastrophe that now unfolded before him. Yet, as the panicked occupants of the Grand Worthington estate, along with their equally aghast neighbors, stumbled from their homes, some in various states of disarray, Nolan's thoughts were far from the immediate, foul cleanup. His mind, razor-sharp and singularly focused, dwelled instead on Delia's smartphone, a device that incessantly buzzed with illicit messages she naively believed remained hidden from his sight. The digital breadcrumbs left by a discreetly installed tracker application confirmed his chilling suspicions. Her vehicle was once again undeniably parked at Serenity Cove. This was not merely a recurring incident. It marked the third clandestine visit this very week. A cold, hard resolve solidified within Nolan. With a decisive shift of the gear stick, he smoothly engaged the truck's transmission, allowing the powerful vehicle to glide past the epicenter of the odious disaster. He did not pause, did not slow. His highly skilled crew, a formidable force in their own right, would competently manage the repulsive aftermath come morning light. Tonight, however, Nolan Maxwell harbored far more urgent, indeed, far more personal, matters to attend to. The coarse gravel beneath Nolan's tires crunched with a sound like grinding teeth as he deftly maneuvered his truck into a concealed position behind a dense cluster of ancient oak trees. From this vantage point, he held a commanding view of the narrow access road leading to Serenity Cove. 50 yards distant, shrouded in the deepening twilight, rested Delia's sleek silver Accord, its windows veiled by a thick film of condensation, a telltale sign of prolonged occupation. Beside it, unmistakable even in the gloom, was a formidable black Escalade, its temporary dealer plates glinting faintly, indisputably the vehicle of Corbin Devereaux. With a chilling precision that belied the turmoil within, Nolan retrieved his smartphone, his thumbs swiftly navigating to the camera application. The powerful zoom lens, an unforgiving eye, brought the illicit scene into sharp, undeniable focus. He observed Delia's distinctive blonde hair, a beacon of betrayal, pressed intimately against the passenger window. He saw Corbin Devereaux's hands, brazen and possessive, entangled in the delicate fabric of her blouse, their bodies swaying in a primal rhythm that utterly desecrated the sacred vows of matrimony. Methodically, dispassionately, Nolan captured 17 distinct photographs, each frame clearer, sharper, and more damning than the last, building an irrefutable dossier of infidelity. When at last the clandestine embrace concluded, Nolan, a silent and unseen witness, watched his wife of 12 years. He observed her as she meticulously smoothed her disheveled hair, then instinctively checked her reflection and reapplied her makeup in the rearview mirror. It was a routine, he noted with a surge of bitter recognition, performed with a practiced, professional ease, as if this illicit ritual had been repeated not once, but 100 times before. Corbin's Escalade was the first to depart, its crimson taillights rapidly shrinking into the distant darkness, disappearing in the direction of Willow Creek, the affluent side of town where the truly privileged resided. Delia followed minutes later, likely charting a direct course for home, to hastily wash away the incriminating evidence and, with a chilling lack of conscience, slip into their shared bed beside him, feigning the blissful slumber of innocence. Nolan remained in the oppressive darkness for another hour, the only light emanating from the harsh LED glow of his phone screen as he scrolled through the damning gallery of images. In that unforgiving luminescence, his face appeared to be not merely carved, but brutally chiseled from unyielding granite. There were no visible tears, no outward manifestations of blinding rage, only the stark, cold clarity of calculation. By the time he finally steered his truck towards their ostensibly shared residence, Delia was already ensconced in their master bedroom, meticulously orchestrating the illusion of deep sleep. Her breathing, however, was far too controlled, unnaturally rhythmic, a dead giveaway. Guilty individuals, Nolan knew from a lifetime of observing human deception, invariably strove too diligently to project an image of unblemished innocence. With a quiet, deliberate motion, Nolan retrieved a spare pillow and a thick blanket from the hallway closet, then retreated, without a word or backward glance, to the sterile sanctuary of the guest room. Tomorrow, he resolved, the true, painstaking work of dismantling his shattered life, piece by deliberate piece, would unequivocally commence. The following morning, Delia discovered Nolan in the sunlit kitchen, calmly immersed in the daily newspaper, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in his hands, as if the preceding night's events and the seismic shift in their marital landscape had never transpired. She moved about the space with a practiced, almost robotic efficiency, retrieving her insulated travel mug and distractedly checking her phone. "How was the emergency call?" she inquired, her gaze remaining fixed on the glowing screen, a clear indication of her disinterest. "Messy," Nolan replied, deliberately turning a page of the newspaper, his voice devoid of inflection. "The Worthingtons are going to require a complete system replacement. That's an exceedingly expensive undertaking." Delia, still not looking up, reached out and bestowed a fleeting kiss upon the crown of his head, a gesture so utterly automatic and devoid of genuine affection that it churned Nolan's stomach. "I've got property showings scheduled for the entire day," she declared, her tone dismissive. "Don't wait up if I happen to be late." "I won't," Nolan confirmed, his voice flat. As soon as her car disappeared down the driveway, Nolan's calm demeanor dissolved into focused determination. He opened his laptop and began a series of meticulously planned phone calls. The first was to Arthur Kingston, a shrewd lawyer who owed Nolan significant favors stemming from a septic crisis at his own lakeside retreat. The second call connected him to his trusted accountant, whose expertise would be crucial. The third, and perhaps most critical, was placed to a private investigator renowned for specializing in complex matrimonial cases. By the stroke of noon, the skeletal framework of his retaliatory plan had firmly materialized. Protecting the business assets was Nolan's paramount priority. Apex Environmental Solutions and Construction, a testament to 15 years of relentless dedication and arduous labor, had been painstakingly built from virtually nothing. It had burgeoned from a single, humble service truck into a formidable fleet of 20 specialized vehicles, employing 43 dedicated individuals. Delia's name, through a misguided sense of trust and shared future, was unfortunately inscribed on a handful of the foundational papers, a decision Nolan now profoundly regretted. Yet, Arthur Kingston, his voice reassuringly confident, assured him that legal avenues existed to safeguard the core assets, to insulate them from the impending storm. "You're talking about divorce, then?" Arthur asked, his voice a low hum through the phone line. "I'm talking about meticulous preparation," Nolan corrected, his tone steely. "The business must remain entirely intact, regardless of what bitter personal strife may unfold. That's non-negotiable." "That's exceedingly smart thinking, Nolan," Arthur commended. "Most men wait until it's tragically too late, leaving themselves vulnerable to ruin." Nolan concluded the call, his thumb pressing the end button with a definitive click. He walked over to his office window, a panoramic view of his thriving enterprise unfolding below. His crew, a well-oiled machine, was efficiently loading specialized equipment onto a truck, preparing for the extensive Worthington job. Barry O'Connell, his seasoned foreman, directed the ballet of machinery and men with the calm, unwavering authority of someone who had commanded such operations for over 2 decades. Barry was one of the precious few individuals Nolan still trusted implicitly, a rare commodity in the desolate landscape of his current reality. Eleanor Vance, the private investigator, a slender woman with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless dissolved marriages, arrived precisely at 2 in the afternoon. She carried a sleek briefcase brimming with sophisticated surveillance equipment. "How long do you estimate this affair has been ongoing?" she asked, her gaze analytically sweeping over the damning lake photographs displayed on Nolan's phone. "Difficult to pinpoint precisely," Nolan admitted, his voice even. "I first observed subtle changes in Delia's behavior roughly 3 months ago. New, more expensive clothing, a distinct, unfamiliar perfume, increasingly frequent late-night work sessions. All classic, textbook indicators. The location tracking, however, was a rather intelligent move on your part. Most people, in their arrogance, fail to consider their phones as silent betrayers." Eleanor made swift, concise notes in a finely crafted leather portfolio. "I'll require a few days to firmly establish their patterns, gather incontrovertible evidence. We need meticulous documentation that will withstand intense scrutiny in a court of law." "And what of the man?" "Corbin Devereaux," Nolan supplied, a slight tightening around his jaw. "I am intimately familiar with his reputation. He owns 3 prominent car dealerships across the region. He operates under the delusion that his considerable wealth renders him utterly untouchable. He resides in Willow Creek with his wife and 2 children." Eleanor offered a grim, knowing smile. "Wealthy men," she observed, "invariably overestimate their own intelligence, convinced they are always one step ahead." After Eleanor's departure, Nolan dedicated the entire afternoon to his private workshop, meticulously modifying various pieces of his industrial equipment. With surgical precision, he carefully removed the crucial safety valve from one of his smaller pump trucks and ingeniously installed a manual override system in its place. The work was painstaking, methodical, each movement deliberate and exact. To the untrained eye, to anyone not intimately familiar with the nuances of septic machinery, the modifications would appear utterly normal, seamlessly integrated into the truck's design. Delia eventually arrived home just before midnight, enveloped in a lingering scent of expensive men's cologne. She immediately launched into a theatrical performance, weaving elaborate excuses about exceptionally demanding clients and unforeseen complications in her real estate dealings. Nolan, outwardly composed, feigned belief, nodding at what he judged to be appropriate junctures as she droned on about fluctuating property values and intricate mortgage rates. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight," he announced when her protracted performance finally concluded. Delia paused, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossing her features. Why? Are you feeling unwell? Just need more undisturbed sleep, Nolan replied, his voice calm, measured. The recent emergency calls have been quite taxing, wearing me down. She accepted his explanation without a shred of genuine concern or even a probing question. Another damning red flag. A truly faithful wife, he mused, would have expressed profound worry, perhaps offered to prepare him a soothing tea or gently suggested he consult a physician. Delia, in contrast, merely shrugged, her indifference a sharp, piercing jab, and headed, without hesitation, for the shower. 3 days later, Eleanor called with a crucial update. They are consistently meeting at the Lakeside Manor on Thursday afternoons, she reported, her voice crisp and efficient. He reserves the same room every week, specifically room 317. I've already obtained irrefutable photographic evidence of them entering the building together and, subsequently, discreetly leaving separately. The affair, Nolan, is unequivocally well established. Nolan's grip on the phone tightened imperceptibly. Is there any indication, he pressed, his voice low, that they are planning anything beyond mere physical intimacy? Eleanor's tone shifted, a hint of professional intrigue entering her voice. That, Nolan, is where the narrative becomes considerably more compelling. I shadowed your wife to Marcus Thorne's law office yesterday. Mr. Thorne, as you may know, is a specialist in high-asset divorces. She was engaged in a lengthy consultation there, spanning over 2 hours. A cold, heavy weight seemed to settle in Nolan's chest, a chilling premonition. She's planning to file, he stated, not as a question, but as a grim certainty. It certainly appears that way, Eleanor confirmed. And there's an additional, rather telling detail. Devereaux has also visited the same law firm. A different day, of course, but the identical office. They are unequivocally coordinating their efforts, Nolan. I would wager a substantial sum on it. These individuals, she concluded, her voice laced with a subtle disdain, believe they are playing a sophisticated game of chess, but in reality, they are merely painting conspicuous targets on their backs. That very evening, Nolan confronted Delia, not about the infidelity, not yet, but with the surgical precision of a seasoned strategist, he broached the subject of their shared finances. I've been giving serious thought to expanding Apex Environmental Solutions, he casually remarked over dinner, meticulously observing her reaction. Perhaps acquire Sterling's equipment when he eventually retires. It would be a significant acquisition. Delia's fork, laden with food, paused midway to her mouth. That sounds incredibly expensive, she murmured, a flicker of something akin to apprehension in her eyes. It most certainly would be, Nolan affirmed, maintaining his detached demeanor. I would need to leverage some of our personal assets to finance it. The house, perhaps some of the investment accounts. Her hesitation was palpable. I don't know if that's a particularly wise move right now, she offered, her tone suddenly cautious. The market has been notoriously volatile recently. You're probably right, Nolan conceded, feigning reluctant agreement, though his gaze remained sharply fixed on her face. It's just that opportunities of this magnitude don't present themselves very often. He kept his voice deliberately casual, but his internal calculations were rapid and precise. I'll likely need to reallocate some funds anyway, reorganize the business structure for optimal tax purposes. Delia, clearly unnerved, suggested, perhaps we should consult with a financial advisor first. Get a professional opinion. Good idea, Nolan agreed, a silent, sardonic smile playing on his lips. The conversation had seemed innocuous enough to Delia, a mere discussion of business strategy. But Nolan had gleaned precisely what he needed to know. Her pronounced hesitation, her sudden, uncharacteristic concern about market volatility, her immediate suggestion to involve a third party. She was stalling, clearly buying time. She knew her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, would require ample time to meticulously establish her fabricated claim on their marital assets. 2. Nolan decided with grim satisfaction, could most certainly play that treacherous game. The very next morning, Nolan met with his accountant, initiating the complex, methodical process of restructuring Apex Environmental Solutions. The company, a monument to his tireless labor, would be meticulously transformed into a limited liability corporation, complete with multiple subsidiaries, each meticulously designed to hold distinct and carefully segregated assets. Delia's name, through a series of subtle but legally impregnable maneuvers, would be quietly and systematically removed from all but the most inconsequential paperwork. Any community property claims she might attempt to assert would be legally restricted to the least valuable, most easily expendable components of their shared life. This is a remarkably aggressive strategy, Nolan, his accountant cautioned, a note of apprehension in his voice. If she retains a truly skilled lawyer, they might attempt to challenge it vigorously. Let them try, Nolan replied, his voice cold and unwavering. Every single action we are undertaking is entirely within the bounds of the law. The business was firmly established long before our marriage, and its significant growth stemmed exclusively from reinvested profits, not from any alleged marital assets. What about the house, then? The accountant inquired. The house, Nolan declared, his tone dismissive, is entirely expendable. That same afternoon, Nolan drove to Willow Creek, the opulent, meticulously planned development where Corbin Devereaux resided. The houses here were sprawling, almost identically grand, boasting perfectly manicured lawns and sweeping circular driveways that screamed of newly acquired, ostentatious wealth. Corbin's residence was effortlessly identifiable. The ubiquitous black Escalade sat prominently in front of a colonial-style mansion adorned with more decorative columns than a government building. Nolan parked discreetly across the street, settled back, and waited. An hour later, a woman emerged from the imposing house. She was blonde, much like Delia, but notably older, possessing an understated elegance that bespoke genuine breeding and refinement rather than mere financial prosperity. This, Nolan deduced, had to be Laura Devereaux. She gracefully climbed into a pristine white Mercedes and drove purposefully towards town. Nolan followed at a discreet distance, meticulously observing her movements. She stopped first at a high-end grocery store, then at a professional dry cleaner, and finally, she pulled into the parking lot of the Cedarwood Community Hub. He waited patiently until she disappeared inside the building, then, with calculated steps, approached the entrance. The community center was bustling, hosting a charity auction to benefit the local food bank. Nolan purchased a ticket, feigning casual interest, and seamlessly mingled with the diverse crowd, his gaze subtly but consistently tracking Laura Devereaux. She navigated the room with the effortless grace of a seasoned professional, engaging in polite small talk, her expression composed as she meticulously examined the various silent auction items. Every facet of her demeanor, her controlled gestures, her elegant posture, radiated an aura of sophisticated self-possession. When she momentarily stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, Nolan followed, his approach measured and deliberate. Mrs. Devereaux, he addressed her, his voice low and firm. She turned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching in mild surprise. Yes, I'm Nolan Maxwell, he introduced himself, and I believe we need to have a conversation. For a fleeting instant, her meticulous composure faltered, a mere flicker in her eyes, but it was enough to confirm that she knew precisely who he was and why he was there. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss," she stated carefully, her voice tightly controlled. "Your husband," Nolan countered, his tone devoid of emotion, "is engaged in an intimate relationship with my wife. I would argue that provides us with an abundance of topics for discussion." Laura's gaze darted around the parking lot, a quick, almost imperceptible scan to ensure their conversation remained private, unheard. "What precisely do you want?" she asked, her voice now edged with a brittle frustration. "Information? Cooperation? Perhaps a modest measure of justice." Nolan met her gaze directly. "I have no interest in petty games, Mrs. Devereaux." "Neither do I," she affirmed. Nolan then produced his phone, displaying one of the damning lake photographs he had captured. "This image," he explained, his voice flat, "was taken 4 days ago. I possess dozens more, in addition to hotel records, detailed phone logs, and incriminating credit card statements. Your husband, I assure you, is not as discreet as he fondly imagines himself to be." Laura studied the digital image with the detached, almost clinical interest of someone examining a piece of compelling forensic evidence. "How long have you been aware of this?" she inquired, her voice betraying no emotion. "Long enough to be absolutely certain," Nolan replied. "And you, Mrs. Devereaux? How long has this been known to you?" 6 months, she answered, her voice steady, but Nolan detected a distinct undercurrent of ice beneath the surface. "Perhaps even longer. I retained a private detective myself the moment I discovered suspicious hotel charges on his credit card statements. Men of Corbin's ilk genuinely believe their wealth renders them invulnerable, untouchable. But money, Mr. Maxwell, always leaves a distinct, traceable trail." "Are you planning to divorce him?" Nolan asked directly. "I am planning," Laura stated, her words calm and chillingly measured, as if she were discussing the day's weather, "to utterly destroy him." She continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "Corbin believes I am nothing more than a pretty face, a decorative accessory content to squander his money. But I hold an MBA from Wharton, Mr. Maxwell, and I possess an intimate knowledge of where every single penny of his assets is meticulously hidden. When I am finished with him, he will be fortunate to even qualify for public assistance." It was then, in that moment, that Nolan felt the first genuine, unforced smile he had experienced in weeks stretch across his lips. "I believe, Mrs. Devereaux," he declared, "that we're going to get along just exceptionally well." They conversed for another 20 minutes, exchanging vital information and carefully establishing a set of ground rules for their clandestine alliance. Laura possessed a trove of financial records that would irrefutably prove Corbin had been systematically skimming money from his dealerships, illicitly funding his affair. This included evidence of lavish hotel rooms, exorbitantly expensive dinners, and ostentatious jewelry that, crucially, had never made its way home to his unsuspecting wife. Nolan, in turn, contributed compelling surveillance footage, detailed phone records, and the utterly devastating hotel room recording. But the true, formidable weapon in their arsenal was Nolan's business itself. Apex Environmental Solutions held lucrative contracts with nearly half of the commercial properties throughout Maplebrook, including, ironically, all 3 of Corbin's car dealerships. These comprehensive contracts contain meticulously drafted clauses concerning environmental compliance, waste disposal protocols, and emergency response procedures. More critically, they granted Nolan's company unrestricted access to the property's intricate septic and drainage systems. "You going to do what?" Barry O'Connell asked, his voice incredulous, when Nolan painstakingly outlined the audacious plan. "Corbin Devereaux," Nolan replied, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Needs to comprehend, in the most visceral sense, that actions invariably carry profound consequences. This, Barry, is merely an educational endeavor." They began with Corbin's smallest dealership, a used car lot positioned on the quiet outskirts of town. In the deep stillness of a Tuesday morning, Nolan and Barry, utilizing their master key, gained unchallenged access to the property's elaborate waste management system. The lot's primary septic tank was intricately connected to the main sales building through a labyrinthine series of underground pipes that snaked beneath the customer parking area. Nolan had meticulously modified one of his smaller pump trucks, ingeniously equipping it with a reverse flow capability. Instead of its traditional function of removing waste, this innovation allowed it to forcefully pump raw liquid back into the system under immense, precisely controlled high pressure. He had rigorously tested this clandestine modification on abandoned property, and its efficacy had been perfectly proven. The clandestine setup at the dealership required approximately 45 minutes of precise, synchronized effort. Barry expertly positioned the specialized truck while Nolan, with practiced ease, opened the septic access point and securely connected the heavy hoses. Then, with a quiet, yet utterly devastating resolve, they unleashed 300 gallons of raw, undiluted sewage back into the building's internal plumbing system, generating an immense pressure that would inevitably force the putrid waste upwards, erupting violently from every single drain within the structure. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, the dealership had been utterly transformed into an unimaginable disaster zone. Sewage had violently erupted from every toilet, every sink, every floor drain, flooding the pristine showroom and all office areas with a horrifying tide of human waste. The resulting stench was utterly indescribable, a visceral assault on the senses. Corbin Devereaux arrived just after 9 in the morning to find his employees huddled in the parking lot, their faces a mixture of disgust and despair, utterly unwilling to re-enter the contaminated building. The local fire department had already been summoned, along with stern representatives from the health department and a highly specialized emergency cleanup crew. Nolan observed the unfolding chaos from across the street, calmly sipping his coffee, savoring every moment of the spectacle. Corbin was screaming, his face a mask of apoplectic fury, wildly gesticulating at the putrid mess as he berated his bewildered manager. The immediate cleanup alone, Nolan knew, would cost tens of thousands of dollars, and the lot would remain shuttered for at least a week, crippling sales. But this, Nolan reminded himself with grim satisfaction, was merely the overture. 3 days later, the second dealership, a larger, more prominent location, experienced an even more catastrophic system failure that deluged the entire service bay with an overwhelming torrent of wastewater. The timing, Nolan noted with a chilling smirk, was absolutely impeccable. A dozen unsuspecting customers were patiently awaiting their meticulously serviced vehicles when the repulsive eruption began. Videos capturing their panicked flight from the building, clutching their noses in disbelief, went explosively viral across all social media platforms within mere hours, further cementing Corbin's public humiliation. The third, and arguably most devastating, incident unfolded during Corbin's single largest sales event of the entire year. His flagship dealership was hosting a grand tent sale, complete with live music, popular food trucks, and enticing promotional giveaways. Over 200 potential customers were leisurely browsing the expansive lot when, with a horrifying synchronicity, every single drain in the colossal building simultaneously backed up. The ensuing chaos was truly biblical in its scale and ferocity. Fountains of raw sewage erupted from storm drains, creating putrid rivers of waste that surged across the once clean parking lot and spilled into the bustling street. Pristine automobiles were irrevocably contaminated. Customers, screaming in sheer panic, fled the scene in disarray. And, in a stroke of exquisite irony, the local news crew, who had initially been dispatched to cover the exciting sales event, captured visceral footage that would undoubtedly lead the evening broadcast, ensuring maximum public exposure for Corbin's spectacular downfall. His carefully cultivated reputation was utterly destroyed overnight. Social media exploded with relentless mockery, rife with cruel jokes about Devereaux's craft show sales and crappy car deals. The health department, acting swiftly and decisively, shut down all 3 of his locations indefinitely, pending a comprehensive investigation. His insurance company began asking increasingly uncomfortable, pointed questions about the baffling statistical impossibility of 3 separate, catastrophic system failures occurring in less than 2 weeks. But the true, irreparable damage was overwhelmingly financial. Between the astronomical cleanup costs, the devastating loss of sales revenue, and the insurmountable expense of contaminated inventory, Corbin was hemorrhaging money at an alarming rate. His prestigious dealership franchise, once a source of immense pride, was now threatening to revoke his coveted license. His bank was meticulously reviewing all of his loan agreements, poised to call on his debts. And through it all, Nolan maintained an impeccable, airtight deniability. Apex Environmental Solutions had responded to all 3 calamitous emergencies with unwavering professional efficiency, working relentlessly, around the clock, to contain the repugnant damage. No one, not a single soul, suspected that the very company diligently alleviating the problems was also, paradoxically, subtly profiting from the carefully orchestrated solutions. Delia, meanwhile, was visibly starting to crack under the relentless, mounting pressure. Corbin's escalating financial tribulations were directly impacting her own insidious plans, and in her mounting desperation, she had begun making increasingly careless mistakes. She frequently forgot to delete incriminating text messages, left her laptop conspicuously open to sensitive emails from her lawyer, and had noticeably increased her nightly wine consumption with dinner, seeking solace in alcohol. "Everything all right at work?" Nolan inquired one evening, his gaze calmly observing her agitated pacing around the kitchen. "Fine," she snapped, a brittle edge to her voice. "Just some exceptionally difficult clients. Anyone I might know?" Nolan pressed gently. She shot him a sharp, suspicious look. "Why on earth would you know my clients?" "Small town," Nolan shrugged, turning back to his newspaper. "Word just gets around, you know how it is. I heard Corbin Devereaux has been experiencing some rather significant troubles with his dealerships. Sewage problems, from what I understand." Delia's wine glass, halfway to her lips, froze. "I wouldn't know anything about that," she mumbled, her voice strained. "Terrible thing, really," Nolan continued, feigning casual concern. 3 separate system failures in 2 weeks. Has to be some kind of record, wouldn't you agree? "These things happen," she insisted, though her conviction was clearly wavering. "Not usually," Nolan countered, looking up from his paper, his gaze unwavering. "Most commercial septic systems are meticulously designed to endure for decades without encountering major, catastrophic problems." Of course, he mused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. If someone genuinely desired to cause problems, it wouldn't be all that difficult, would it? All one would require is direct access to the system, and, naturally, the precise equipment. "What are you suggesting?" Delia asked, her voice tight with thinly veiled panic. "Nothing at all," Nolan replied, his smile widening slightly. "Just making conversation. Although," he added, his tone deceptively innocent, "I did notice that all three of Devereaux's properties utilize our waste management services. Quite an interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Delia carefully placed her wine glass onto the counter, her fingers trembling perceptibly. "I'm going to bed," she declared, her voice barely a whisper. "Sweet dreams," Nolan responded, his gaze still fixed on her retreating form. After she had disappeared, Nolan opened his laptop and meticulously reviewed the surveillance footage he had collected over the past week. Delia had visited her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, twice. She had made 17 phone calls to Corbin Devereaux. And, perhaps most tellingly, she had spent 3 intensive hours researching bankruptcy law on her computer. The relentless pressure, Nolan confirmed, was undeniably working. The subsequent phase of Nolan's intricate plan demanded even more delicate timing and precise execution. Laura, with relentless determination, had systematically documented Corbin's labyrinthine network of hidden assets. This included the discovery of a clandestine account nestled in the Cayman Islands and a surreptitious partnership in a lucrative luxury car import business that Corbin had meticulously failed to report to the IRS. She had also uncovered irrefutable evidence that he had been systematically falsifying loan applications, brazenly inflating his declared income while deliberately understating his substantial debts. The federal charges alone, Laura informed Nolan during one of their clandestine meetings, her voice grim, could easily land him in prison for a decade. But I want him to lose absolutely everything first. Prison, I believe, will prove far more educational if he's already utterly destitute. "What about Delia?" Nolan inquired, shifting the topic. "What about her?" Laura countered, her eyebrows raised. "She is planning to file for divorce the instant she secures a substantial loan against our house. Once that money is safely in her account, she will vanish without a trace." Laura considered this for a moment. "Can you prevent the loan from being finalized?" "I've already initiated the process," Nolan explained. "My accountant is restructuring the business assets as we speak, and my lawyer is rigorously challenging her dubious claim to the house. But there remains a critical window of vulnerability while the extensive paperwork is being processed." "How long is that window?" Laura pressed. "Perhaps 2 weeks," Nolan estimated. "After that, her lawyer won't be able to touch anything that truly matters." "Then we must move with greater velocity," Laura declared, her resolve hardening. The accelerated timeline necessitated taking significantly greater risks, pushing the boundaries of their intricate scheme. Instead of patiently waiting for natural opportunities to present themselves, they would now have to meticulously create their own. Laura, leveraging her extensive social connections within Maplebrook's elite circles, ingeniously organized a high-profile charity fundraiser at the prestigious Verdant Hills Country Club. The event was ostensibly aimed at raising vital funds for local flood victims, a cause calculated to garner widespread support. Crucially, the fundraiser would bring together every influential person in the community, including both Delia and Corbin, who, due to their social standing, would be unable to avoid attending without attracting undue suspicion. The grand fundraiser was meticulously scheduled for a Saturday evening, allowing them a precise 5-day window to prepare their audacious final act. Nolan spent those intense days making additional, sinister modifications to his specialized equipment and coordinating tirelessly with Barry, who had enthusiastically volunteered to assist with the more technical, clandestine aspects of the operation. "You're absolutely certain about this, boss?" Barry asked, a note of apprehension in his voice, as they rigorously tested the modified pump system behind Nolan's workshop. "This is going to be incredibly public." "That, Barry," Nolan replied, his eyes gleaming with cold purpose, is precisely the point. Delia and Corbin have conducted their illicit affair in the shadows, cloaked in a web of lies and calculated deception. It's time to drag every sordid detail into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. And if we get caught, very pressed, we won't, Nolan stated with unwavering certainty. The equipment is legitimate. The chemicals we're using are standard waste treatment products. And everything we're doing, Barry, is technically legal. Messy, yes, but fundamentally legal. The extensive modifications consumed 3 intense days of meticulous labor. Nolan painstakingly removed the standard dispersal system from his largest pump truck and ingeniously installed a high-pressure sprayer, typically employed for the deep cleaning of septic tanks. He also integrated a sophisticated remote trigger system that would allow him to activate the powerful spray from a distance of up to 50 yards. The payload itself was a vile concoction, a precisely calibrated mixture of processed sewage and an industrial-strength stench enhancer, a noxious chemical compound specifically designed to identify gas leaks. The resulting combination, Nolan knew, would generate an odor so overwhelmingly powerful it could evacuate an entire building in mere minutes, while the liquid component would indelibly stain everything it touched with a color and smell that would linger for weeks. An undeniable mark of their humiliation. On the designated Saturday afternoon, Nolan discreetly positioned the formidable truck in the country club service area, artfully concealed behind a maintenance building where it blended seamlessly with other utility vehicles. The high-pressure sprayer was meticulously aimed at the club's grand main entrance and the expansive dining patio, the very location where the pre-dinner cocktail hour would soon be held. Precisely at 6 in the evening, the first wave of elegantly dressed guests began to arrive. Delia made her entrance alone, resplendent in a sleek black dress that likely cost more than most people's monthly salary. She effortlessly mingled with the burgeoning crowd, expertly playing the role of a deeply concerned community member, all while furtively checking her phone every few minutes. Corbin arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by Laura, both of them maintaining the impeccable facade of a happily married couple. He was tanned, exuded a false confidence, and worked the room as if he owned every inch of it. Several well-meaning individuals approached him, offering condolences about his recent, publicly known business troubles, but he brushed off their concern with glib jokes about the inherent hazards of the septic business. Nolan observed from the dimly lit bar, nursing a beer, patiently awaiting the opportune moment. The audacious plan demanded that both Delia and Corbin be prominently visible when the carefully orchestrated chaos commenced, preferably positioned near the center of the unsuspecting crowd, where they would be unable to escape without being undeniably seen. At precisely 6:45, the perfect opportunity presented itself. Delia was standing near the patio railing, engaged in animated conversation with a group of women about soaring property values. Corbin was 15 feet away, holding court with several influential local business owners, his booming laughter echoing across the patio. Both of them were impeccably positioned within the designated target zone. Nolan quietly retrieved his phone, opened the remote control application, his finger hovering for a moment over the ominous trigger button. Then, with a definitive press, he activated it. The explosion of sewage was utterly magnificent, a truly grand spectacle of calculated devastation. The high-pressure system launched a colossal geyser of viscous brown liquid 30 feet into the cool evening air, creating a horrifying fountain of waste that rained down upon the unsuspecting patio like a biblical plague. The stench, a concentrated, sickening wave of pure effluvium, assaulted the senses a moment later, sending people stumbling away from the blast zone, gagging uncontrollably and desperately covering their faces in disgust. Delia was directly in the path of the initial, overwhelming spray. Her once elegant black dress instantly became a grotesque canvas of human waste, and her meticulously styled blonde hair was plastered to her skull with a liquid that defied any civilized description. She attempted to run, but slipped on the slick, fouled stone, falling face first into a shallow, putrid puddle of sewage. Corbin fared no better. His pristine white shirt and tan slacks were thoroughly soaked through, and the abominable stench seemed to cling to him, pursuing him relentlessly as he stumbled in a desperate, undignified retreat towards the parking lot. Several quick-thinking individuals captured his chaotic flight on their phones, forever immortalizing the precise moment when Maplebrook's most arrogant businessman was utterly transformed into a walking, reeking disaster. The meticulously orchestrated chaos endured for 8 glorious minutes before Nolan, with a quiet satisfaction, deactivated the system. By then, half of the horrified party guests had fled the scene in utter disarray, and the remaining half stood frozen in the parking lot, too utterly shocked to utter a single word. The patio resembled a nightmarish war zone, entirely covered in putrid waste and abandoned personal items. Delia sat in the middle of it all, utterly drenched in sewage and weeping uncontrollably. Her expensive phone had been irrevocably destroyed in the fall. Her designer purse floated forlornly in a noxious puddle of waste, and her meticulously constructed public image lay in complete ruins around her. Nolan finished his beer, his expression serene, and calmly walked to his truck. As he drove away, he could faintly discern the distant wail of sirens. The fire department would inevitably have to hose down the entire contaminated area. The health department would launch a full-scale investigation, and the Verdant Hills Country Club would require extensive, professional cleaning services, all of which, Nolan mused with a quiet smirk, would be expertly provided by Apex Environmental Solutions at premium emergency rates. The fallout from the country club incident was both immediate and devastatingly pervasive. Videos of the sewage explosion went explosively viral within hours, with Delia's humiliating fall becoming a particularly popular, widely shared meme. Local news stations eagerly picked up the story, and even national cable networks ran it as a macabre human interest piece about the unforeseen hazards of aging urban infrastructure. But the social media attention, intense as it was, paled in comparison to the professional consequences. Delia's real estate clients, suddenly unwilling to be associated with someone who had become a public laughingstock, began canceling appointments en masse. Her office received dozens of relentless prank calls, and her agitated boss began openly questioning whether she had become an irredeemable liability to the company's pristine reputation. Corbin's situation was even more dire. His insurance company outright refused to cover the contaminated inventory from his dealerships, citing suspicious circumstances. His lucrative franchise agreement was summarily terminated, and his significant business loans were called in early, sending him spiraling towards insolvency. The IRS, prompted by an anonymous, meticulously detailed tip that included comprehensive financial records, swiftly launched a full-scale investigation into his tax returns. Within a single, brutal week, both Delia and Corbin were facing absolute financial ruin. Delia desperately attempted to salvage her crumbling situation by accelerating her divorce plans. But the substantial loan application she had submitted was summarily rejected when the bank unexpectedly discovered that Nolan had already filed meticulously prepared paperwork vigorously challenging her dubious claim to the house. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, informed her with grim finality that the community property laws she had been so confidently relying upon would definitively not apply to business assets that demonstrably predated the marriage. "What do you mean I can't touch the company?" she shrieked, her voice raw with disbelief, during a phone conversation that Nolan, standing in the next room, overheard with chilling clarity. "The business was firmly established prior to your marriage, and your name was only added to secondary documents for insurance purposes," Marcus Thorne explained, his voice sounding weary. "Without irrefutable proof that marital assets were directly used to grow the company, you simply have no legitimate claim to the primary holdings." "But I was listed as a partner," Delia insisted, her voice rising to a frantic crescendo. "You were merely listed as a beneficiary for insurance purposes, Delia," the lawyer patiently clarified. "That is fundamentally different from being a legal, vested partner." Delia, in a fit of impotent rage, hurled her phone across the room with such force that its screen cracked with a sharp snap. When she looked up, Nolan was standing calmly in the doorway, his expression a mixture of detached curiosity and cold amusement. "Having a bad day?" he inquired, his voice even. "You bastard," she spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "You planned this entire thing. The sewage, the business restructuring, all of it. You've been setting me up all along." Nolan walked into the room, his movements deliberate, and settled calmly into a chair directly opposite her. "Delia," he began, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. For 12 long years, I placed my absolute trust in you. I worked 18-hour days, day in and day out, to meticulously build something meaningful, something that would provide for both of us for a shared future. I put your name on important documents, foolishly shared my deepest dreams with you, and genuinely believed that we were true partners in every single sense of the word." "We were partners," Delia insisted, her voice cracking. "No, we weren't," Nolan countered, his voice like cold steel. "Partners don't lie to each other, Delia. Partners don't steal from each other. And partners certainly don't conspire to utterly destroy each other with the eager assistance of their lovers." Delia's face went utterly pale, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "How long have you known?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Long enough," Nolan replied, pulling out his phone. He played a mere 30 seconds of the hotel recording he had meticulously captured. Her voice, casual and chillingly cruel, filled the room, discussing loan amounts and asset division with a shocking nonchalance. "You recorded us," she gasped, her voice laced with outrage. "I documented everything, Delia," Nolan stated, his voice flat. "The affair, the financial conspiracy, the multitude of lies you so brazenly told our friends and family. I possess enough irrefutable evidence to utterly destroy you in court. But I assure you, I'm no longer willing to wait for the slow, agonizing machinery of the court system." "What do you want?" she stammered, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "I want you out of my house," Nolan declared, his voice unwavering. "I want you permanently out of my life. And, most importantly, I want you to comprehend, unequivocally, that actions carry profound and lasting consequences." Delia stood up, her entire body shaking with impotent rage. "You can't just throw me out. I have rights. Read the paperwork your lawyer filed." "Delia," Nolan calmly advised, his voice almost conversational, "you will find that your rights are far more limited than you deluded yourself into believing. The house is registered solely in my name, purchased before our marriage with money I earned entirely on my own. The business assets are meticulously protected by a comprehensive corporate structure. Your claim to community property extends to approximately $12,000 in a joint checking account and half the furniture. That's all. This is illegal," she cried, her voice rising. "You can't hide assets from a divorce. I'm not hiding anything, Delia. Nolan clarified, his voice sharp. I'm simply protecting what was always unequivocally mine. Nolan stood up, his full height making the office seem suddenly smaller, more confining. You have until tomorrow morning, he announced, his tone cold and definitive, to pack your personal belongings. After that, I am changing the locks. And if I refuse, she challenged, her voice trembling, then you'll be trespassing on private property, Nolan stated, his gaze unwavering, and I will have you arrested. Delia stared at him for a long, agonizing moment, likely searching for some lingering sign of the man she had married, the man she believed she had utterly broken. But that man was gone, utterly replaced by someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. You're going to regret this, she finally managed to say, her voice hollow. No, Nolan replied, his voice devoid of emotion. I'm not. Delia departed the following morning, her meager possessions limited to 2 suitcases and the Honda Accord. She attempted to take more, but Nolan had meticulously prepared an itemized list of every single item in the house, precisely separating marital property from his personal assets. The furniture, the electronics, the artwork, all remained his, meticulously purchased with business income that predated their marriage. She moved into a cheap motel on the desolate outskirts of town, the kind of transient place that rented rooms by the week and studiously avoided asking too many questions. The stark, brutal contrast with her lavish previous lifestyle was both intentional and profoundly humiliating. Every morning, she would awaken to the relentless drone of highway traffic and the pervasive, acrid smell of diesel fuel emanating from the truck stop next door. Corbin's situation, meanwhile, was deteriorating even faster, a rapid descent into absolute ruin. The IRS had swiftly seized his bank accounts and placed punitive liens on all of his properties. His wife, Laura, had aggressively filed for divorce and was now relentlessly demanding half of everything he owned, including the substantial assets he had so arrogantly attempted to conceal overseas. The federal investigation into his rampant tax evasion was moving forward with relentless momentum, and federal prosecutors were actively discussing the serious prospect of criminal charges. But Nolan was far from finished with either of them. The next phase of his intricate plan demanded meticulous patience and surgical precision. He had learned from Eleanor Vance that Delia was meeting with a bankruptcy lawyer, desperately exploring options for debt relief and asset protection. She was also frantically searching for a new job, though her now notorious reputation rendered her virtually unemployable within the tightly knit local real estate market. Corbin, meanwhile, was desperately attempting to liquidate his remaining assets before his wife's determined lawyers could claim them. He had hastily put his opulent house on the market and was desperately negotiating to sell his share of the import business to his overseas partners. Both of them were singularly focused on immediate financial survival, a singular focus that made them profoundly predictable. And predictable people, Nolan knew, made exquisitely easy targets. Nolan initiated his next move by targeting Delia's frantic job search. Each time she applied for a new position, he ensured that the potential employer anonymously received a discreetly crafted email containing direct links to the viral videos from the country club incident. The emails were professionally written, expressing feigned concern about hiring someone with recent, highly public relations challenges, and subtly suggesting that a simple internet search would effortlessly reveal the full, humiliating scope of the problem. The strategy, Nolan observed with cold satisfaction, was devastatingly effective. Delia would often perform admirably during interviews, sometimes even receiving verbal job offers, only to have them summarily rescinded after the employer conducted a perfunctory background check that inevitably led them to the damning online evidence. She began to suspect systematic sabotage, but crucially, she could not prove anything. Corbin's frantic real estate sale was disrupted through even more direct, personal means. Nolan had Barry O'Connell, his trusted foreman, pose convincingly as a potential buyer, expressing a keen interest in the Willow Creek property and requesting a private showing. During the meticulously orchestrated tour, Barry asked unusually detailed questions about the home's septic system, casually mentioning that he had heard unsettling rumors about problems with similar, upscale properties in the immediate area. "Oh, we've never experienced any issues whatsoever," Corbin assured him, his voice laced with forced nonchalance. "This system was installed just 5 years ago, state of the art." "That's certainly good to hear," Barry replied, his voice even. "I work in waste management, you see, so I possess an intimate knowledge of just how astronomically expensive these problems can be to rectify." Barry then casually pulled out his phone and displayed a photo of one of Corbin's dealerships in the midst of its disaster, a scene of utter, putrid chaos. "This," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "is precisely what happens when these systems catastrophically fail. It takes weeks to clean up, Mr. Devereaux, and it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars." Corbin's face went utterly pale. That's one of my businesses," he stammered, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. "Really?" Barry feigned surprise, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. "Small world, isn't it? We handle the cleanup for a great many commercial properties around here. It seems you've had some truly unfortunate luck recently." "Yeah, some kind of freak coincidence," Corbin mumbled, clearly shaken. "3 separate failures in 2 weeks. "That's not coincidence, Mr. Devereaux," Barry interrupted, his voice casual but his eyes hard and unwavering. "That, I assure you, is sabotage. Someone, Mr. Devereaux, wanted to inflict immense harm upon your business, and they possessed an intimate knowledge of precisely how to achieve it." Corbin's hands began to tremble visibly. What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should be exceedingly cautious about who you choose to trust," Barry advised, his voice laced with subtle menace. "And perhaps you should profoundly reflect on what you might have done to provoke someone to such a degree of anger." Barry left without making an offer, but the damage was irrevocably done. Corbin spent the remainder of the day frantically calling security companies and obsessively researching advanced surveillance systems. He was finally beginning to understand, with a chilling clarity, that his recent spate of troubles was not merely random bad luck. It was targeted, relentless revenge. But understanding, Nolan knew, offered no immediate solution to his insurmountable problems. His house sale catastrophically fell through when the next potential buyer uncovered the property's direct, infamous connection to the dealership disasters. His business partners began rapidly distancing themselves, fearful of the inevitable guilt by association. His substantial legal bills were mounting faster than he could possibly pay them. Within 2 agonizing weeks, Corbin Devereaux was forced to declare bankruptcy. The final, decisive confrontation occurred on a crisp Thursday afternoon in October. Delia had been living in the squalid motel for 6 agonizing weeks, barely surviving on meager unemployment benefits and growing increasingly desperate. Her bankruptcy filing had been summarily rejected due to its suspiciously convenient timing relative to her ongoing divorce proceedings. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, had officially withdrawn from the case, citing accumulating unpaid bills and irreconcilable differences regarding strategy. She had also, at last, discovered that Nolan had been systematically sabotaging her relentless job applications. The stark realization came when a former colleague, in a moment of misguided sympathy, mentioned seeing her in the viral videos, expressing heartfelt commiseration for her humiliating experience at the country club. The colleague also, inadvertently, mentioned receiving a peculiar email concerning Delia's character issues from someone claiming to be a concerned community member. The email, the colleague explained, contained intimate details about your personal life that only a truly close friend or someone with access to your private affairs would know. Whoever sent it clearly went to great lengths to ensure you didn't get hired. Delia knew immediately, with a cold certainty, who that someone was. She drove directly to the Apex Environmental Solutions office that afternoon, parking her Accord next to Nolan's familiar truck and marching into the building as if she still held unquestionable ownership of the place. The receptionist, momentarily flustered, attempted to halt her, but Delia, driven by a raw, unbridled fury, pushed past and headed straight for Nolan's private office. He was seated calmly behind his desk, diligently reviewing invoices with the serene concentration of someone who had meticulously put his life back together, brick by deliberate brick. He looked up the instant she burst through the door, his expression shifting from an initial flicker of surprise to one of cold, detached amusement. "Delia," he stated, his voice flat, "you look terrible. You destroyed my life," she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. "You destroyed your own life, Delia," Nolan countered, his voice steady and unwavering. "I merely ensured that there were consequences for your actions." She slammed the door behind her with a resounding thud and advanced purposefully on his desk, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "You think you're so incredibly smart, don't you? Sitting here in your pathetic little kingdom, playing puppet master, while my entire world utterly collapses around me. Your world fell apart, Delia," Nolan stated, his voice still calm, but with an underlying current of steel, "because you made the conscious decision to betray the person who loved you most. Every single thing that has happened to you," he continued, his gaze piercing, "was a direct, undeniable result of the choices you meticulously made." "I made one mistake," she cried, desperation creeping in her voice. "You made a dozen mistakes, Delia," Nolan corrected, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The affair was merely the egregious beginning. You conspired to steal my business, to forge loan documents, and to leave me utterly financially ruined. That, Delia, was not a mistake. That was a calculated crime." Delia laughed, a bitter, hollow sound devoid of humor. "And what you did to us wasn't criminal. Sabotaging Corbin's businesses, systematically destroying my career, publicly humiliating us both? That wasn't criminal. Everything I did was entirely legal," Nolan replied, his voice firm. "Unpleasant, perhaps, undeniably messy, but entirely within the confines of the law. You, Delia, cannot truthfully say the same about fraud, adultery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Legal doesn't mean right," she screamed, her face contorted. "Neither, apparently, does marriage," Nolan retorted, his voice chillingly calm. He stood up, his imposing height making the office seem to shrink around her. "You wish to discuss right and wrong, Delia? Let us then discuss the 12 years I painstakingly spent building something genuinely meaningful, something lasting, while you meticulously planned its utter destruction. Let us discuss the profound trust one foolishly placed in you, and how you so cruelly wielded it as a weapon against me. I loved you," she sobbed, the words tearing from her throat. "No, Delia, you didn't," Nolan corrected, his voice flat. "You love what I could provide for you. The house, the comfortable lifestyle, the social status. When Corbin offered you something he believed to be better, you did not hesitate for a single second to summarily discard everything we had painstakingly built together." Delia's composure finally cracked entirely. You're a vindictive, cruel man, she wailed, tears streaming down her face. I sincerely hope you're happy with the monster you've become. I'm not happy, Delia, Nolan admitted, his voice quiet. But I am free. Free from your relentless lies, your insidious manipulation, and your complete, utter lack of loyalty. That, I assure you, is worth far more than mere happiness. And what about Corbin? She spat, clutching at a last straw. What did he ever do to you besides fall in love with the wrong woman? Corbin did not fall in love with you, Delia, Nolan countered, his voice laced with contempt. He saw an opportune moment to take what belonged to another man, and he took it with gleeful abandon. Men of his ilk genuinely believe they are entitled to whatever they desire, regardless of who gets irrevocably hurt in the ruthless process. So you decided to play God? She accused. I decided to play by the very same ruthless rules that you and Corbin meticulously established, Nolan replied, his eyes cold and unwavering. No merci, no forgiveness, no second chances. Delia stared at him for a long, agonizing moment, desperately searching for some lingering trace of the man she had married, the man she had so foolishly believed she could control. But Nolan had fundamentally changed, hardened into something implacable, unforgiving, and utterly formidable. This isn't over, she finally managed to say, her voice hollow. Yes, Delia, it is, Nolan replied, his voice calm and definitive. Your divorce will be finalized next month, and after that, we will never, ever see each other again. You will rebuild your life somewhere else, I sincerely hope, with a far better understanding of what consequences truly mean. And if I don't want to rebuild, she challenged, her voice trembling. What if I want to fight? With what, Delia? Nolan inquired, his voice laced with chilling derision. You possess no money, no job, no friends, and no legal standing whatsoever. Your once pristine reputation is utterly destroyed, your credit is in ruins, and your boyfriend is facing serious federal charges. You are welcome to fight, Nolan concluded, settling back into his paperwork, his gaze now dismissive, but you will be fighting utterly alone. Delia stood there for another full minute, likely clinging to some desperate hope that he would betray a sign of weakness or regret. When none came, she finally turned, defeated, and walked slowly toward the door. Delia, Nolan said quietly, just as her hand reached the doorknob. She stopped, but did not turn around. The next time you decide to betray someone who truly loves you, Nolan continued, his voice low and deliberate, make absolutely certain they do not possess access to industrial equipment and a working knowledge of the county's waste management systems. She left without another word. Corbin's final, crushing humiliation arrived 3 weeks later during his federal sentencing hearing. Laura had meticulously provided federal prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of 15 distinct instances of tax evasion, ranging from meticulously concealed, unreported income to brazenly fraudulent business deductions. The IRS, after a thorough audit, calculated his total liability at just over $3 million, including all penalties and accrued interest. But it was the severe criminal charges that truly, utterly destroyed him. The presiding judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of rigorous supervised probation. All of his remaining assets would be immediately liquidated to satisfy his gargantuan debts, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a crippling criminal record that would follow him for the remainder of his life. Nolan attended the sentencing, positioned discreetly in the back row of the courtroom where Corbin, now a broken shell of a man, would not see him. When the damning verdict was read aloud, Corbin's legs buckled uncontrollably, and he had to be helped into a chair by his stunned attorney. The arrogant businessman who had once believed himself utterly untouchable was reduced to a pitiful, broken figure begging for mercy. Laura also attended, seated composedly on the opposite side of the courtroom, maintaining the same chilling composure she had exhibited throughout the entire grueling process. When their eyes met across the somber room, she offered Nolan a small, knowing nod of profound satisfaction. After the hearing concluded, they met briefly in the courthouse parking lot. "Feel better?" she asked, her voice calm. "I feel complete," Nolan replied, a profound sense of finality in his tone. "What about you?" "I feel vindicated," Laura stated, a quiet strength in her voice. "Corbin spent 20 years treating me like a mere accessory, foolishly assuming I was too stupid to comprehend his intricate business dealings or too weak to ever fight back." Watching him realize in that moment just how profoundly wrong he was, that Nolan was worth everything. "What's next for you?" Nolan inquired. "I'm relocating to Seattle," Laura revealed. "My sister operates a successful consulting firm there, and she's offered me a partnership. A new city, a new life, a fresh beginning." "Sounds like a solid plan," Nolan commented. "What about Delia?" "Delia is leaving town next week," Laura confirmed. "She found a job in Sunstone City. Apparently, they're somewhat less thorough with background checks in Arizona." Laura offered a grim smile. "Do you think she finally learned her lesson?" "I believe she learned, unequivocally, that actions have very real and very painful consequences," Nolan replied. "Whether that fundamental understanding truly alters her behavior in the future, that, I am pleased to say, is no longer my problem." They shook hands firmly, like business partners concluding a highly successful, if unorthodox, venture, which in many profound ways they were. Then Laura drove away in her pristine white Mercedes, heading towards a future that no longer contained the shadow of her cheating husband. Nolan remained standing in the parking lot for several more minutes, observing the last of the courthouse employees depart for the day. It had taken a methodical 4 months to completely dismantle and destroy the people who had so callously betrayed him, but the arduous work was, at last, truly complete. Delia was utterly broke and professionally unemployable. Corbin was now heading to federal prison. The illicit affair that had so brazenly begun with passionate, clandestine meetings at Lakeside Manor had ended with public humiliation, utter financial ruin, and a criminal prosecution. Justice, Nolan reflected, was indeed a dish best served with industrial equipment and meticulously executed planning. 6 months later, Nolan was calmly enjoying his morning coffee in his office when Barry O'Connell knocked discreetly on the door. "Boss," Barry announced, "there's someone here who's asking to see you." "Who is it?" Nolan asked, looking up from his paperwork. "She says her name is Brenda Hayes. Claims she has some rather important information about Delia Maxwell." Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Send her in." Brenda Hayes was a thin woman in her 50s with nervous, darting eyes and calloused, work-worn hands. She introduced herself as Delia's former roommate from the motel, explaining that she had moved out 2 weeks prior to Delia's departure for Sunstone City. "I probably shouldn't even be here," she began hesitantly, wringing her hands, "but I felt you should know what she was planning." "Planning?" Nolan prompted, a familiar coldness beginning to settle in his chest. "She spoke about you constantly," Brenda recounted, her voice hushed. "How you had utterly ruined her life. How you had stolen everything she believed she deserved. Towards the very end, she was talking quite obsessively about getting even. Getting even how?" Nolan asked, his voice flat. "She had this idea," Brenda continued, shifting uncomfortably in her chair, "about coming back in a few years, once things had calmed down. Maybe hiring a lawyer from out of state, challenging the divorce settlement. She genuinely believed that if she could somehow prove you had hidden assets or something like that, she might be able to reopen the entire case. That's not how divorce law fundamentally works, Nolan stated, a cynical smirk on his face. I told her that, Brenda insisted, her voice rising slightly. But she absolutely wouldn't listen. She was utterly convinced that all she needed was the right approach, the right evidence. Brenda shifted uncomfortably again. There's something else, too. She actually asked me to mail some letters for her after she left town. Said she didn't trust the Sunstone City postal system. What kind of letters? Nolan pressed, his gaze piercing. I don't know for sure, Brenda admitted, but one of them was addressed directly to the IRS. Another one went to the state attorney general's office. She said something vague about reporting tax fraud and hidden business assets. Nolan remained silent for a long moment, carefully considering the insidious implications. Delia was clearly attempting to weaponize the legal system against him, desperately hoping that federal investigators, in their thoroughness, would somehow uncover something his meticulous lawyers had somehow missed. It was a desperate, amateurish move, but potentially dangerous if she had managed to fabricate truly convincing, albeit false, evidence. When precisely did you mail these letters? He asked, his voice low. Yesterday, Brenda confessed, her eyes filled with remorse. I'm so sorry. I truly should have opened them first, but she paid me $50, and I really needed the money. It's not your fault, Brenda, Nolan reassured her, pulling out his wallet. He handed her $500, a sum that visibly startled her. But I genuinely appreciate you telling me. After Brenda left, Nolan immediately called his lawyer and his accountant, explaining the unexpected situation and requesting an immediate, comprehensive review of all business filings. If Delia had indeed submitted false allegations to federal agencies, he needed to be fully prepared with irrefutable documentation that would refute her spurious claims at every turn. The meticulous preparations consumed 2 intense weeks, but ultimately, they proved entirely unnecessary. Delia's desperate letters to the IRS and the Attorney General's office were thoroughly investigated and summarily dismissed within a month. The agencies, after their diligent inquiries, found absolutely no evidence of hidden assets or fraudulent business practices. Furthermore, Delia's already shattered credibility was irrevocably undermined by her recent criminal background check, which chillingly revealed the conspiracy charges that had been filed against her and subsequently dropped as part of her desperate plea agreement. The final, crushing blow came when the Sunstone City police contacted Nolan to inform him that Delia had been arrested for attempting to forge real estate documents. Apparently, she had clumsily attempted to create fake property deeds that, had they succeeded, would have given her fraudulent ownership of several vacant lots in Arizona. The scheme was laughably amateurish and easily detected, but it carried serious, life-altering felony charges. She's looking at 5 to 10 years, the detective explained over the phone. Her public defender is vigorously pushing for a plea deal, but the prosecutor is determined to make an undeniable example of her. We've been tracking a ring of persistent real estate fraudsters, Mr. Maxwell, and your ex-wife's case fits the pattern precisely. Nolan thanked the detective and hung up, feeling something he hadn't experienced in many, many months. Genuine, profound satisfaction. Delia had finally encountered consequences she could not manipulate, could not blame on others, and could not escape through legal maneuvering or cunning deception. She was going to prison, probably for longer than Corbin, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to alter her fate. He poured himself a glass of amber bourbon and walked out to his workshop, where the modified pump truck sat silently under a heavy tarp. The equipment had served its grim purpose, but he kept it as a tangible reminder of what unwavering determination and meticulous planning could ultimately accomplish. Barry found him there an hour later, still holding the bourbon and staring reflectively at the truck. "Everything okay, boss?" Barry inquired. "Everything's perfect, Barry," Nolan replied, a genuine, if chilling, smile on his face. "Delia just got arrested for real estate fraud in Sunstone City. She's looking at serious prison time. Jesus, that woman just can't help herself. Can she?" Barry muttered, shaking his head. "Some people never learn," Nolan observed, his voice tinged with a quiet wisdom. "They keep making the same mistakes, over and over again, yet inexplicably expecting different results. What are you going to do with the truck?" Barry asked, breaking the silence. Nolan considered the question for a long moment. The pump truck had been instrumental, a vital tool in the methodical destruction of his enemies, but keeping it felt like holding onto the bitter past. He had moved beyond mere revenge and into something far better, a life free from the insidious influence of people who would betray him for selfish, personal gain. Restored to standard configuration, he finally decided. "It's just equipment, Barry. The real power was never in the truck itself. It was in the unwavering understanding that actions inevitably have consequences." Barry nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes, and began systematically removing the tarp. As Barry worked, Nolan finished his bourbon and walked back towards the office, where a substantial stack of new contract awaited his review. Apex Environmental Solutions had grown by an impressive 30% over the past year, thanks in no small part to his unwavering reputation for handling difficult, complex situations with quiet efficiency and unflappable resolve. He had painstakingly built something enduring and truly lasting from the ashes of a shattered marriage, something that belonged entirely to him, forged by his own hands and intellect. And unlike the treacherous people who had tried so desperately to destroy him, he had accomplished it all without breaking a single law or violating anyone's sacred trust. In the end, Nolan knew that was the only victory that truly mattered. 3 years later, Nolan married a woman named Eleanor Vance, the astute private investigator who had so skillfully helped him document Delia's destructive affair. She understood, with an intimate clarity, the profound value of loyalty and the agonizing price of betrayal. Having witnessed countless marriages utterly destroyed by selfishness and malicious deception, their wedding was a small, exquisitely private ceremony, attended only by those who had proven themselves trustworthy over years of genuine friendship and unwavering fidelity. Delia was still incarcerated in prison, serving her full sentence. Corbin had been released from prison, but was now living in a grim halfway house, working minimum wage jobs and desperately struggling to rebuild his shattered life. Neither of them had any contact whatsoever with their former lives in Maplebrook. Sometimes, late at night, Nolan would recall the visceral sound of sewage exploding across the Verdant Hills Country Club patio, or the look of utter, despairing realization on Delia's face when her meticulously laid plans crumbled to dust before her eyes. But those memories now felt distant, almost ethereal, like scenes from someone else's life, detached and unreal. He had moved beyond the dark satisfaction of revenge and into something fundamentally better, a future meticulously built on solid, unshakable ground, surrounded by people who valued unwavering honesty above fleeting convenience and unwavering loyalty above self-serving personal gain. The septic business, Nolan reflected with a quiet, knowing smile, as it turned out, was an excellent metaphor for life itself. Everyone, without exception, produced waste, but only the truly intelligent ones made absolutely certain that it flowed far, far away from their foundational core.